I hope everyone's doing pretty good today. Yeah, if you stumbled in the wrong room, this is Cinematic Color Grading, Lightroom Essentials, sponsored by FUJIFILM. And yeah, I would give you guys a demo on my FUJIFILM presets, but that has to be done in camera. So if you're interested in that, after this talk, I'll be heading down to the FUJIFILM booth where you guys can test out the FUJIFILM cameras and all of the film presets and all the simulations. It'll be great. But we're going to be talking about my post-processing workflow today, which is in Lightroom. So if you don't know who I am, my name is Kyler Steele. I'm a travel and documentary photographer. I just spent the last month in Japan and then the past week in Iceland. So I haven't had great sleep, so sorry for the lack of energy. But I've got some great photos, and we're going to be editing some of those today live and just showing how I color them. But yeah, I'm based in New Jersey, so right across the way. It's about an hour commute for me. And my work focuses on capturing emotion, focusing on childhood memories, and I've really been focusing on my project, which has been about amusement parks across the United States and all over the world. And I primarily shoot with Fujifilm cameras right now. I use a Fujifilm GFX 102 and also my Fujifilm X106. So those are my go-to cameras. And I also shoot JPEG and RAW for the flexibility. I use both the Fujifilm simulations, just so I could post those right away, because I have about 10,000 photos from Iceland that I haven't even looked at yet. So we're going to hop right into a little bit about cinematic color grading. And I want to talk a little bit about my photography journey when I first started. I was a software engineer coming out of college, and I picked up photography to be my creative hobby. And when I first started, I just color balanced everything, was very technical, and thinking about coloring an image like this teal and orange was not something I thought I would ever do. And I was kind of confused why people would do it, because I just didn't really have this creative mindset. So it took me a while to really learn about my own photography and figure out what emotion do I want to share and how does color impact a photo. So we're going to go over some of the common color schemes, and then we're going to dive a little deeper into my photo work, and then we'll show you how to do it. So as you know, this is a complementary color scheme. This is the most common that people use. It's teal and orange, and this is from Mad Max Fury Road. You can see I'm going to be showing you some of the most popular movies to show you why you should color your photos cinematically. So the next that we have is there's not just complementary color schemes in movies. Movies use a wide variety of color schemes. So this is the analogous color scheme. And for anyone that follows my work, you know that this is actually my favorite color scheme for my photos. It's green, yellow, and orange. It's very untraditional, almost jarring, and it's used in some of these crazier movies to show a lot of emotion. So this is Joker, and there's obviously other ways that you could use the analogous color scheme. You could use the blues, you could use the reds, but there's so many ways to show off color in cinematic ways that are different than the complementary color scheme. So this is Blade Runner, and this is the monochromatic color scheme. As you can see, this is just straight different colors of orange. This is a little narrowed down from the analogous color scheme, and if you had taken a photo of New York City and put this color scheme on, it's definitely not the first way that you would think, but it is a cinematic way to color your photos. And if you're trying to tell a story, I would say that it's not bad to edit your photos this way, especially with the weather that we've had recently. If you want to show off this foggy scene and it's how you're feeling, then I encourage you to try to edit in some of these different ways. And then also we have the triadic color scheme. This is from 20th Century Girl, and as you can see, once again, it's a very wild color scheme. If you ever took a portrait session and just edited like this for your client, they'd probably be very confused. But when you edit photos for yourself, that's where you could really put your emotion and your feelings into it. And as you can see, this is blue, yellow, and red. And when you color these cinematic colors, you don't actually have to have a perfect balance of the 3 colors, the 2 colors, or however many colors. You can just add a little bit of pop, like the red in the lips here, and the yellow in the skin tone, and then have an overall feeling of the image with the coolness in the blues. So some of my favorite work from other photographers, William Eggleston, Todd Heido, they are strong users of color. And these are some of the artists that inspired me to really dive deeper into this color grading technique. So I just wanted to show a couple examples for you from other photographers that are really using color in unique palettes so you can see the world a little differently for yourself. So editing is pretty hard. We could all admit that. It's definitely half the battle once you get your camera. Luckily, there are some cameras, like the FUJIFILM cameras, that allow you to get cinematic colors right out of them. So this is actually just from one day that I had. I went down to Coney Island with my friends, and this is just one FUJIFILM simulation on the XM5 camera, which is one of the cheapest FUJIFILM cameras that you could get. It's just a great camera, but I loaded up a film simulation in and just lowered my exposure compensation and was able to get beautiful complementary colors straight out of the camera. And like I said, if you want to talk more about these cameras, we can go down to the FUJIFILM booth after this, and you can go try them out. They have a great Lego station if you haven't seen it. But getting cinematic colors doesn't have to be just from editing. You can get to a good starting point before that. So if you want to know how, like I said, we're going to dive a little deeper into that now, and you could see it later. So for the times that my FUJIFILM camera can't process colors in the way, I like to use the raw files to push them just a little further. So this is the project that I was telling you about. This is the amusement parks that I've been photographing across the United States. And as you can see, I've been using this analogous color scheme, using green, yellows, and reds. And to me, it's a very unique color scheme. I haven't seen many people use it. And I'll be honest, I was very hesitant to pursue a project with this color scheme because I had never seen any other photographers actually use it. But for me, it's something about these colors that make me think a little more. They make me feel a little more, because when I just looked at the images normally, it's an amusement park, and yes, it's a great composition and everything, but when I see it with these colors, it makes me take a step back. And it makes me think more about the world. It made me think, why don't I see the world in the great colors that I saw when I was little? Because I swear when I was little and I was at these fairs and these amusement parks, everything was in 100% saturation. But now, it didn't seem like that. So being able to come back and edit my photos in a way that made me feel like that really was powerful for me. So I encourage you guys to pursue a color grading technique that would be good for you. So let's dive into the tools that I use in Lightroom. And if you are familiar with Lightroom, these are some of the 5 main ones. So the first one is the basic, and this is where you could find tools like white balance and tone. So this is how you could change your image from cool to warm, magenta to green. And then the tone curve is the next one. It's a very, very powerful tool. I have some friends that only edit with the tone curve. And the tone curve allows you to really manipulate the image and get a powerful look straight from this tool. Next up is the color mixer. Adobe does change these names kind of often, so if this changes, then yeah. But this used to be HSL, and HSL is inside of this, which is hue, saturation, and luminance. And in here, you can manipulate exact colors. So you could go into the blues and make them teal right there. You can change the oranges to yellow. And you could also increase those saturations and those tonal values. And then fourth up, we have the color grading tab. And for me personally, this is where I love to do my work. This allows you to color your photos based on the tone of your image. So you could specifically target the shadows of your image, the highlights of your image, and you can manipulate it heavily here to get some of the color grading techniques that I showed in the beginning. And then finally is the calibration tool. And without going too deep into this, every pixel of your image has an RGB value. And inside of the calibration slider, you can change what the hue saturation is of these pixels. So it's kind of deep, and it's a very good tool, and we'll dive into it. So now we're just going to go step by step, take a look at how you could edit an image with just one tool. So for example, this is a straight out of camera image from the GFX 100 RF. And all I did here was just warm it up and bring the tint to the green a little bit. And you can see it's a completely different image. There's no changes to the contrast of the image. There's no other changes at all. But you can see it's a drastically different image. And for some people, this can be the end point of their image. And others, this is your new starting point. So really, you can choose with your white balance. Do you want to start at a neutral image and then start adding other tools on? Or would you like to start at a stylized image, and now you could build upon that with other tools? So the second one that I want to talk about is the tone curve. And most people know the tone curve to add contrast in. A lot of people do an S-curve, or they even do an inverted S-curve to take contrast away. But what a lot of people don't know is that there's actually colored tone curves, and they naturally have this complementary color scheme inside of them. So as you can see, the top of the tone curve is tinted red, and the bottom of the tone curve is tinted blue. So you can pull the shadows of your image down to blue, and the highlights of your image up to red, and naturally get a complementary color scheme in just a couple clicks in your image. And once again, you can add this on with many tools to start building a very cinematic and stylized color grade. The third that we want to talk about is something that a lot of people love to use, myself included, is the HSL tab. And specifically here, we're just looking at the hue. So for the hue, we could see here, I just went and took this image that is color balanced and just threw a more teal and orange look on it by pulling those blues down and changing those yellows to a more orange. So very easy. You can just change this. And once again, this is just one tool. And with one tool at a time, you can get a very stylized look. But it's really the magic happens when you add a lot of the tools together. And then finally, the tool that I truly love to use, the color grading tool. This is great because, like I said, you can see you have these 3 color circles here. And with these circles, you can select, do you want to color the shadows or the highlights? Or there's even a global circle that I haven't shown here, but we'll see in Lightroom soon. Actually, this is the final, the calibration slider. As you can see here, we have these blue and orange pixels here at this night shot. And we're able to just go into this blue primary, bump up the saturation, but also bring it a little more to the teal side, and then bring that red hue a little more to the orange side to emphasize those colors in those images. All right, so now we're going to hop in. We're going to do it live. We're going to take a look at Lightroom, and we are going to learn a little more about colors. So unfortunately, this is either going to be the best part for you or the worst part. This is the technical part. So before I just show you how I emotionally edit an image, I want to show you technically what these tools do to an image. So every image is made up of colors and tones. So these tools impact the colors and the tones of the image differently. So the tool that I like to use, color grading, which we could see here, impacts the tones. So if I was to go down here and throw blues into the shadows, you can see that the darker pixels in this image would turn blue. And if you go ahead here and add orange to these highlights, you can add orange to the highlights, essentially. But then you notice that there's also there's spaces in the image that don't get colored. These bright whites and these dark blacks. And for some images, that's perfectly fine. But for other people, when you really want to dial in that color, you want to make sure that the whole tonal range is colored. And for me, one of the favorite things that I don't think a lot of people know is if you drag this highlight slider here, this is the luminance slider down, you can tone those pure whites by bringing them down a little bit. And it really adds a really nice grade to the image, especially on cloudy days. And once again, you could also bring up these blues to add just a little more blues to the shadows. This is a great way to get a perfect split on that teal and orange look. And then, like I said, you don't have to balance this completely. And you can see we have this balance slider on the bottom here. So if your image has more shadows than highlights or more highlights than shadows, you can just go in here and slide this and see how the blues start to creep up, and then the oranges start to creep up if you pull it the other way. So just in this one tool, there is so much power when it comes to tone in your image. Now let's take a look at the color wheel, because hopefully you guys are visual learners because it's a very visual tutorial, but this is what all of the colors in your image would look like. And just with a couple tools, like I said, you can take the white balance, and this would be your neutral starting point. But if you pulled it all the way to the side, you could see that you could get a starting point that's a lot more monochromatic just from changing your white balance. So if you tried to get your whole image to be yellow and red by going into HSL, you might struggle because you realize that you can't pull the blues that far. So I recommend that before you jump into tools like HSL and some of these more powerful tools, that you get your starting point correct. And same thing goes for a cooler image. If you want to start on a cooler side for a winter edit or a foggy day, pull this white balance to the blues to make sure that your starting point is a lot more accurate and a lot more where you would like to be. There are some mistakes that come with this color grading, especially when you're doing very heavy edits. For me, the analogous color scheme has been hard because I'm essentially taking half of this color wheel and I have to push it into a different color or just remove it by getting rid of the saturation. And some of the issues that you may run into is fringing. So when you pull the hue too far on these images, you can start to see some of the colors fall apart, especially when you're increasing the saturation, lowering the saturation. The color wheel has a chance to just fall apart and get a little messy. So using this technical breakdown, you can see how far can you push these, how far can you take it before the image really starts to fringe and fall apart. Luminance is one of the most dangerous ones. I don't know if it'll show it on this color wheel, but if you've ever used the luminance slider on your blue skies, you usually get a little bit of fringe on the horizon. So some of these tools, like I said, the tone curve, the HSL, are very dialed in and very powerful, and they can ruin your image just as fast as they can add that cinematic color to them. So now we are going to dive in. We're going to take a look at a couple of images here. And I'm just going to walk you guys through how I would look at an image, how I would color it. And there are millions of ways to color an image. So I might look at this if I was doing this presentation tomorrow and color it completely differently. And honestly, some people might look at the raw file and say, this is a perfectly good photo. But for me and for you, this whole talk is about finding your emotion and finding how you would color this image. So I'm sure you're thinking if you would just keep it this way, or if you would take it yellow or blue. But I'm going to show you guys the first way that I would color. And there's one way, which is working with the colors in your scene. You could see that there's natural blues and a little bit of shadows here. But for me, one thing is like when we were all in elementary school, we used to mix paints. So for the colors that I get in those green skies, I found that one thing that I really like to do is to mix my HSL tab with my color grading tab. So I found, it's going to look crazy because I already figured it out, but I found that if I pull my hue down with these blues to this more teal blue and lower this saturation, I get this nice softer pastel blue. And then if I come to my color grading and I add an overall orange warmth to the image, it blends that blue and the orange and it creates this green. Now, a lot of people might not realize this or might get this as a side effect of their editing, because if you just wanted an orange image and you didn't start at the correct starting point, you would get this green because you're adding orange to the blue sky. And that's where we came in before and said, if you did want to edit this and make it look more like a desert, more dry, more warm, you would definitely want to get it to a more warm starting point before applying this global orange filter. Because now you're mixing the orange with the orange, and you can get a warm image. So this is an image of some snow. And the first thing that I want to do is this is obviously a perfectly white balanced image. My camera was able to detect that there was snow and able to see that it wanted it to be white. But as a lot of people and myself would like to make this a lot more cooler, the first thing that I would do is always edit this white balance. It really does get me to a good starting point. So I would just pull this to a more cool tone. And this screen is really saturated. I'm sorry, my screen's not as saturated. So if it's super saturated, I'm sorry. Pull this to a blue tone. And then once again, you come into color grading, come in here. And if you wanted to add a little kicker of orange to the shadows, you can come in here and try to add a little bit. Or you could really dive deeper and really sink in with that blue look. Just add a little more blue and play with this luminance here to get it to look like a cool image. And so a lot of people, I'm sure, edit their images here and are interested in editing their images. And if you've noticed, throughout these images I've edited, have not touched highlights, shadows, contrast, clarity, dehaze. I haven't touched anything. I've only edited the color in my image. And I want you to realize how powerful color is in your photo. Because if you edit all of the contrast and highlights and then the last thing you think of is color, personally, I think you might be editing your image wrong. Because for me, I love to look at the color of my image first and then maybe throw in a little contrast at the end to really give it that oomph. So let's just find a good photo here. So this is a photo it's good, but a lot of people might think it's boring. And this would be a pretty hard photo to color grade just because it's basically starting off as a neutral palette. And like I said, one of the things that I like to do, hop into the color grade tab and take a look at these highlights. And if you're not really sure where you want to take an image, you can just go ahead on this slider right here and just drag it around and see, is there any color that looks natural, or is there any color that makes me feel something? And then you could just find it. And for this, maybe this warm nature is nice on this summer day. And you could just come in here, drag this circle down a little bit, and then you can see some of these highlighted areas don't get the color, but if you come down to this luminance, you could pull it back and really color tone this image. And then like I said again, you can go ahead and you could really warm this whole image up, or you can add blues to the shadow and get a more contrasty, complementary color look. Truly, there are so many ways to take a photo, especially when you know the tools that you have at your disposal. So the first example I showed you, I was mixing colors together. In this example, I would like to show you guys just emphasizing the colors that you have. So there are definitely different skill levels of people here, but in an image like this, where I'm really loving the color of the clouds, I would honestly just go ahead and increase a little bit of dehaze to make those clouds pop, add a little bit of the vibrance to make the clouds pop, and then it looks like the shadows don't have as much color, so I would just go ahead into the color grading section and just find where I feel those shadows look natural. I honestly think they could go into the blues or even the oranges, just depending on how I want to make it feel. If I want to emphasize that the clouds are reflecting on the water and it's making it warmer, or if I want to emphasize that it's a little later in the day and I want the water to be a little bluer, I can take this image either way by just coloring those shadows. So the two ways that I edit my photos, like I said, is one, mix in like paints by taking those blues and then throwing yellows on to make that nice green, or by just taking what I have and emphasizing the colors that are naturally in the photo. So this is a photo I like because it's kind of just a boring day. Well, it's actually a beautiful day in the North Cascades. It's when the larches turn golden. But to me, this was actually an hour before golden hour, and it looked a lot more warm to me. And I want to show you guys how far you can push an image to really make it look cinematic. So we're going to just do a full deep dive edit on this. It might look like it's pushed too far on the screen, but that's going to be okay. One thing that I love to do to get a more cinematic look is you can crop the image. So 16:9 is one of the crops that looks really good, just to get it a little more widescreen look. So we can go ahead and just crop that right ahead. And then, like I said, this was a much more golden light when I had seen this image in person. So I'm going to go ahead here and just pull this to the warm colors. But if I pull it too far, you can see my foreground might get a little too much. So I'm just going to dial that back a little bit, and then it looks like what's left of my image is this beautifully lit foreground and then a background that is kind of just whited out. So I know right away that I want to take the foreground, or the background, which is a brighter part of the image, and I want to add some color to that. So we're just going to go into the highlights here, add a little bit of that warmth, and dial back that luminance to make sure that it shows up in the image. And then to give it that filmic look, I always add a little bit of grain. Between 40 and 50 is usually pretty good because it's enough to show it, but not too much to be distracting. And then, like I said, now that I'm pretty happy with the color, I'm just going to go back and add a little bit of my basic adjustments to really dial this image in. Take a little bit of the dehaze out, add a little bit of that warm glow. Same with minusing the clarity, give it a little more glow. And then just dial a bit of that contrast back in. So for me, this is basically how I would edit a cinematic image. And it's a landscape image, so it's not a traditional movie-like scene, but I'm using the concepts that I've gathered from movies and all the inspiration that I've gathered from other photographers and coming away with an image that's completely different than what I started with. So we started with this white balanced image that was taken, and we ended up with an image that is how I felt in that moment in the mountains. So this is one of the example images that I showed with the FUJIFILM camera, and one of the great things that I love about it is that I can dial that white balance into the camera right away. If I was going to balance this a little more neutrally, it would come out almost looking monochromatic. But for me and my FUJIFILM recipes, I love to start them way more warm because that's how I like to edit my images. I like to edit them warm. If you would like to edit them cool, you could dial that into the camera. So for me, an image like this already has such great cinematic values to it. It's got this monochromatic, warm look that I like. And I would just go in here, and for this one, since I don't have to mess too much with the colors, just mess with the dehaze a little bit to emphasize those shadows, bump up that vibrance, and that's it. From the FUJIFILM images I got, it looks a lot, like I said, it looks a lot more saturated up here, but on my screen it looks good. From the FUJIFILM image that I shot, just doing a couple adjustments and getting a final image that I really like. So one thing about color grading is that shooting a proper image helps a ton. And one thing that I learned from some of my friends is really focusing on the backlights, the side lights, the front light of the image, because that really changes the dynamic of where you start. Tons of my favorite movies are backlit. And for me, this was along a fence in Iceland, and I had the opportunity to shoot these horses from the left side and get a more front-lit situation, but I chose to shoot them from the right side to get this beautiful backlit look. So we're going to go ahead and edit this image, but I just want to let you guys know that really think about the angle that you take your photo, because when you go to start it and edit in Lightroom, you're really going to have these dramatic shadows and these punchy highlights, and now I have two distinct areas of an image that I can edit easily. I guess you guys are really going to see my style because I'm just going to edit very similarly. But I'm going to go in the highlights here, add a little bit of warmth, drop this down, and then the shadows here, I'll go for a more filmic look. And film, when it's expired or taken a certain way, actually gets sometimes a greenish or pink tone to it. So I'll edit this a little more in that analogous color scheme. And we could put a little bit of those greens in the shadow. Just drop this luminance. And even in this calibration slider, there's a great way to add both green or magenta into your shadows here in a nice subtle way. So I'll just pull that down here, and we have a nice color-graded image. And like I said, I haven't even touched any of my basic adjustments yet, which are essential to an image. I'm not saying never touch them, but the color in this image almost makes it feel complete before I even have to start with any of these adjustments. Anyway, I have tons of images here. I would love to open the floor a little earlier for questions. If anyone wants to see a certain style of edits or a certain image graded, I would love to walk you guys through whatever you think you would like to see. So I have, yeah. Do you have? Yeah. First question over here. Any question goes. I could edit, or you could just ask me a general question.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. This is great.
Yeah.
It's working? Yeah. So when you do an edit like this, do you then apply what you did as a preset to the whole shoot that you did for the most part, or do you edit differently throughout?
I definitely do take that base preset and I apply it to that whole set of images, yes, because it makes it a lot easier, especially when I'm really dialing in color. A lot of times on the shoots, I'll obviously shoot from a couple different angles, so I'll just apply, copy and paste it to all of those images, and just go ahead and make some fine tweaks. Yeah, some of my favorite sets have been from all the same place, and they look like they're just a preset slapped on it. But it does take a little bit of fine-tuning to get those images really to line up in color, because just that minute shift in, like I said, the backlight versus the side light will really impact the color in the image.
Hi, how are you? Thank you.
Yeah.
What is your advice for shooting people? Like there's a lot of landscapes here. I know a lot of times it's shiny faces or dull faces, light. Like, what's your advice for editing those photos once you've taken them?
Yeah, I mean, I know some of the wet-end photographers get a little slack for the filmic look, but I truly love the filmic look that they've been going for. I like adding a little bit of that motion blur, adding that cinematic feel. So it's a little bit of getting it right in camera. Because yeah, if you get a perfectly like straight-on portrait shot and then you try to add cinematic colors, it's a little jarring in nature because you're adding a cinematic grade to an image that's more traditional. So I would say the best thing to do is to almost approach your portrait session in a cinematic view. Like lower your shutter speed to 1/50th, get a little bit of blur, add a little bit of tilt to the horizon or whatever it is. I know they're cliches, but truly when you add these kind of colors to the image, you're more so invoking a feeling and you don't want to, make it super traditional. So yeah, I hope that helps. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. Very informative. I noticed could you give an example of how you use like tone curves? Or do you not use those at all?
Yeah, for sure. I could jump into tone curves. Let's see if I can get a good image for you. We'll do this one. So tone curves impact both the tonal value and the color value at the same time. They're very powerful. And yeah, I don't want to make a fool of myself on the stage because they could get crazy out of hand really quick. But for an image like this, you take a look at it, and honestly, I'd want to edit a little yellow, and I want to bring down that tone a little bit because it's a little hot for me. I'd like this to be a little more moody of an image. So the tone curve that I'm going to go to, you can see we have 3 options here. You have this red and cyan tone curve, we have this green and magenta tone curve, and then we have this blue and yellow one. And this blue and yellow one honestly fits perfect for what I'd like to do because I'd like to add warmth and at the same time lower that tonal value. So the tone curve can be a little complicated at first, but the more points you put on it, the less destructive it can be. If you put 1 point on it, it can become very destructive very quickly. But the more points that you put on it, the less destructive it can be because it's editing a little bit less of the image. So for me, I can see that most of my tonal values are in this range. So pulling in this area is really drastically going to impact the image. So I'm just going to go down here, and I'm just going to pull a little bit of this down and get a little bit of warmth while also bringing down the tone of the image. And like I said, this is a powerful tool, so just for me, I have to just go back and forth, which you can do by using the backslash key, just to see how much did I do with that tool. And I can see I did a good amount here. I'd probably like to go in here and add a little bit of an S-curve, get a little more of that punch. And one thing that's really cool here is when you add contrast to your image through this S-curve, you actually add saturation because you're making these pixels a little more punchy. So if I just go ahead here, you can see it's a lot more contrasty, but you got a lot more color. And one thing that I love that they've added recently is this refined saturation slider, which means you can actually add that tonal value to it without adding as much color. So you can pull this down, and I'm not sure how much you could see it, but you can see those greens might be a little too saturated, but if you pull down this refined saturation, it really just pulls them back a tiny bit, which helps in the image. And then that obviously leaves the highlights of the image, which I could color with the tone curve, but I'll just go ahead here, go into the highlights, just match that color, bring down this luminance, and just find where I think this matches. I think that's about fine, and I would call that a final color graded image. Yeah. Hope that helps. Yep.
Hi, I'm just curious about workflow. Like, it's really interesting to me. Do you usually go right into the color grading before touching things like haze and contrast and that kind of thing? Because I feel like I'd always thought that color should come at the end of that process. But have you found that it really doesn't matter what order anything goes in?
Yeah, I think it depends on the day for me. Some days I'll really be loving an image and I'll really want to jump into the color right away and it'll be like a pretty well-balanced image. But there are definitely some images that are washed out or I exposed a little too hot or a little too dark, and I would like to change that exposure right in the beginning. Ultimately, for me, it comes down to when I'm making these heavy color manipulations, I'm bouncing back and forth a lot at the end just to make sure that there's no fringing in these images, make sure that there's no weird color shifts in these greens. So I'm really taking a lot of time going back and forth between the tone and the color. Sometimes it takes me 30 minutes or an hour to edit just one image just to make sure that the color's right. So it doesn't necessarily matter to me exactly which one comes first. It just matters that I hit both of them a couple times, making sure that it's right.
Cool. Okay. So two-part question.
Yeah.
Do you print at all, and then do you do things differently for print than if you're doing for screen? And then, so you know which one you're looking. Print versus screen, and then also, do you because screens show things differently? So
Definitely.
do you do anything to kind of like, because you know it's going to show up on different screens? So print versus screen, and then also different screens.
Yeah, definitely. I used to do a lot of work in the dark room where you would test out prints by doing little strips. And I do the same thing with my prints work. I will take this image and I'll kind of make a bunch of virtual copies, which you could go down here and you can create a virtual copy. And then with this image, maybe I could add a little more saturation this time. So these images will be so closely identical looking on the screen. But then I will just take these snippets, I'll load them into Photoshop as layers, and then just cut out diagonals of these images. And when I send it through the printer, I'll just look, okay, in which one did the colors render the best? And with that, then I'll do a full-size test print or small test print of the full image, and if that looks good, then blow it up a little bigger. Was that your whole question, or was there a second part?
And then the second part was about the different screens, like because just people looking at their phone versus.
Oh yeah, so I've kind of been on my MacBook because of that. I found that most people use iPhones. I'm not entirely sure how my images really look on Android phones because all my friends have iPhones, but I found that if I edit on a Mac, it goes to my phone basically one-to-one. So I primarily edit on my Mac, and I use a studio display as well, just to make sure that those colors are balanced. But I know a lot of my friends do use those little spiders and other calibration tools to get it right. But for me, a Mac has translated well to my phone, and then those little test prints have been very good for me. Yep.
Hi, I was just wondering about just defining that word cinematic, which I feel gets thrown around all the time now. You know, I think, you know, we used to say filmic, right?
Yeah,
Filmic
definitely.
things, and then there's now cinematic. How would you define the difference between that, if there is any?
That's a good question. I think they definitely go hand in hand, especially in some of these cinematic. I think cinematic might even be a little broader because you have all of those different color schemes that are used in film. You have, you know, the complementary, you have the triadic. There's a lot of different things and a lot of different ways to go in a film. You can make it like almost cartoonish. You can make it like action-packed and horror. Whereas I feel like film look is more of this analogous color scheme. It's a little more neutralized. So I don't know. It's really a very open interpretation, I think. A lot of people, you know, depending on what films they watch or what film stocks they use, are going to have a different interpretation of what it is. For me, I guess that's my interpretation, is that film is a little more analogous for me, and I like that filmic cinematic look. But for other people, they might shoot a completely different film and think that it's different. So I hope that helps. But yeah, it's a very broad term, and it's a whole conversation and talk in itself.
Certainly in portraiture at the moment, a lot of people are calling themselves like I'm a cinematic, you know, portraiture photographer. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what does that mean? Is that different from?
Yeah, it's all a feeling, honestly. If someone feels that their work emulates that and they could show that feeling in their work, I think the way that they define their work is correct. So, yeah.
We have one more question back here, all the way back here.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I did have a question. You know that, like, you talked about, I think I heard you talk about, like, some presets that you already have, that all your images, those presets get applied to all of the images that go in. Or I guess my question, like, that kind of relates to that is, if I wanted to have a preset for, say, my, you know, photos for social media, for instance, like, what type of image would I put in to create these presets that would be applicable to, like, everything else that I put into my feed, so it has, like, a look to it?
That's a great question. What me and a lot of other photographers do is we have this look that we like, and we kind of have to curate presets depending on the time of day. So for instance, when I edit my images in this more analogous color scheme, I have one preset for the daytime photos with the blue skies. I have one preset for cloudy skies. I have one preset for nighttime and one preset for indoors. So there are different buckets where photos can be put into where the presets will work. There's not necessarily one image you could take where a nighttime photo and a daytime photo could be edited and get the same color palettes. So you kind of have two options. You could either have a general preset that you put on and then you tweak it as you go, or you can create those little tweaks and then have kind of 4, 5, 6 variations of a preset, and then when you get to your image, you could scroll through them easily and then see which one works the best.